Leaders from the Group of Seven Nations are expected to issue a statement today on steps to help rein in risks from China while preserving economic ties. The leaders of the world's richest democracies have gathered in the Japanese city of Hiroshima for a three-day summit that will focus on the relationship with Beijing and the urgency of ending Russia's conflict with Ukraine. We now cross to our correspondent in Hiroshima, Gilbert. Chris, a very good morning. Thank you so much for joining us and a warm welcome. Just tell us more about the joint statement on China that is expected to be held today.
Good morning. Just a quick update. I actually am in Tokyo, not in Hiroshima, but I can tell you all about China. There is expected to be a special section on China in the joint statement that is going to be released at the end of the three-day summit tomorrow. There has been some clues into what that might be already. On military assertiveness from China around the Taiwan Strait, there's not expected to be any major shift from the current line that the G7 already follows. The issue is just too sensitive. So we're fully expecting the joint statement to feature a line that says that the G7 opposes any unilateral change to the status quo by force. That's diplomacy talk for no invasions. Now, at the moment, the G7 members have just finished their second session for today, and that was all about economic coercion, which of course is about China. It's about diversifying its supply lines away from China, about lowering their economic reliance on China. Now, how they go about framing that language and how about they go about making that roadmap is a little more complicated because, Japan, a $230 billion relationship with China, Germany, relationship with China that's very embedded in their bilateral relationship as well. It's a tricky road to walk. So how they do that is going to be very interesting.
One of the issues that will be thrust into focus at this summit, of course, is the raging war between Russia and Ukraine. And I understand that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is due to arrive in Hiroshima today and attend the summit. What can we expect from that?
Yeah, in a few hours. Look, he is set to, on the third and last day, join in the G7 meetings. He said when Fumio Kishida, the Japanese Prime Minister, visited Ukraine himself a few months ago that he was very eager to come to the G7 summit here. And what we're really going to see is kind of a full circle where all the G7 leaders have gone to Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky will be coming here to the G7. And what that really shows is that as Japan has demonstrated that it cares about issues on the other side of the world, such as the war in Ukraine, that the G7 also cares about issues that are happening here, such as any potential powder keg situation around the Taiwan Strait. It shows that Ukraine and the G7 are putting their money where their mouth is, that the G7 really does stand behind Ukraine, and Ukraine really appreciates and represents that. And we are going to very likely see, we've heard a lot about sanctions in the last couple of days. We may see some further announcements or at least some further requests from Volodymyr Zelensky about what further assistance the country might need to end the conflict as soon as possible.
And are the debt ceiling talks in the United States expected to be discussed at the summit? I mean, considering that the deadlock is already affecting financial markets, and those hardest hit, of course, will be the emerging market economies.
Oh, absolutely. Look, it's an issue that affects the entire global financial system. And the G7 members know that. They discussed this in closed-door sessions during the G7 finance ministers meeting in Japan just a week ago. It is likely going to be discussed, but probably not reflected in any final joint communiques, just like it was not reflected in the final joint communique from the finance ministers meeting, because it is not actually a G7 issue. It is an American issue, but as you said, it does affect the whole global economy. It is going to be discussed, and the G7 is looking to build a more robust global financial system, but the details of that are likely not going to feature the US debt ceiling. It's going to feature more about trade and diversifying supply lines, enhancing food security, and building a more robust global financial system.
So what's the attitude now towards, the United States of America, seeing that it has imposed itself as the big brother of the world?
Well, it depends who you ask. If you're asking from the Japanese point of view, then, obviously Japan and the US have a very, wedded relationship that goes back to the end of World War II. Japan has been referred to as the spearhead of US foreign policy in the Indo-Pacific. A former Japanese prime minister called Japan the US's unsinkable aircraft carrier. So if you ask anybody in Japan, especially the LDP, the ruling party, then it's an extremely favorable opinion and highly open to US suggestion. But if you ask other countries in the world, particularly countries in the global south, which the US is looking to reach out to, it might be a little bit more precarious. There is a little bit of distrust. If you ask the African Union, then they are very keen to follow the G7 line of securing an international order, a rules-based order, a stable rules-based order. But however, they are very keen to see any investment in the region be transparent and be honest. The African Union has said that, it has a very good relationship with China in terms of the investment that China has been putting into Africa, some $282 billion just last year, really eclipsing the US's $72 billion. The AU has also said that China has never meddled in its esteem in the internal affairs of African politics. The same cannot necessarily be said for European countries or America. So there is a balance there between wanting investment, wanting transparency, and wanting honesty, which needs to be negotiated and navigated.
And speaking of transparency and honesty, I understand that there will also be a focus on Beijing's escalating threats against Taiwan. Of course, the self-governing democratic island Beijing claims as its own. And, some of the ways, of course, to reduce Western democracy's economic and supply chain dependency on China. So is there any likelihood of any tensions as a result of the 7 leaders having signaled that China's use of punitive trade measures, will also be discussed at this summit?
Well, there are definitely going to be tensions. There already are tensions. There are tensions inside the G7. If you want to look at tensions, just look a few months ago at French leader Emmanuel Macron's comments that if there was any conflict over the Taiwan Strait, then he believes that Europe should remain independent and not necessarily follow an American line or an American policy on that. And if you look at what happened at the foreign ministers' meeting, they were quickly, snapped all back into one single voice, back on message that they oppose any unilateral action of aggression in the Taiwan Strait. So look, there are tensions, of course, between China as well. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen has just said, in the news today, that she does not want to provoke any conflict, but that there needs to be a maintained pushback against China and to deter China. But at the same time, it is a very sensitive issue. There are multiple bilateral relationships which need to be taken into account inside the AU, inside the G7, inside any of these huge multilateral organizations. It is about sending strong messages, but it is really up to the bilateral relationships and the regulations inside the member countries about how things progress from here.
And of course, that the G7 is set to offer more support in health, food security and infrastructure to help underpin closer ties. Chris Gilbert, lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for your update. All right, that was Chris Gilbert, our correspondent, speaking to us live from Tokyo in Japan ahead of the G7 Nations Summit in that country.